Good morning, everybody. This is Mike Bays from the 24/7 Home Show, and today we have back with us David Schultz, who is the president of L&D Construction in Denver. How are you, David?
Good, Mike. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No, it's our pleasure. There's so much basement finishing happening in the Denver area. We thought it would be a great idea if you could kind of answer some questions and talk to what you see as the main design elements in the basements that you're doing around the Denver area. So I know that we recently looked at it. I think there were 250 basements done in Denver in the last 3 months by contractors and another 200 or so by homeowners. So a lot of that happening. What are the, obviously you work in Denver Metro, you work in Arvada, Colorado, and Golden, Colorado. You work at a little bit in Westminster, Littleton, Lakewood. So what are kind of the design features that are most popular that you see these days?
So I would say generally out of sort of the ordinary in terms of, people generally want a bedroom, bathrooms, entertainment, kind of TV areas. But outside of that general area, I would say, you got wet bars as probably the biggest, some kind of built-ins, whether it's bookshelves or entertainment kind of built-in areas. Every once in a while we see some exercise rooms. Just depends really how big of the basement it is. A lot of the stuff that we've seen over the last couple of years is more in the city, so it tends to not have enough room to do a big exercise room, but we certainly do that. And then do some, cellars, wine cellars, coolers, stuff like that.
Now, you brought up a good point. In the older homes in Denver where you do basements versus new homes, are there limitations to an older home compared to a newer home of what you can do?
Yeah, I would say in general that there are a few. Generally in newer homes, we have a little bit higher ceilings, which is nice for if you want to do any kind of, like some box beams or any kind of arches or architectural details. There's always some structural issues we've talked about, when you've interviewed me in the past, associated with older homes. Newer homes, just the floors tend to be flatter, the walls tend to be more plumb. So in general, it's a little bit easier to do. And then also the newer homes tend to have a little bit more square footage. They're laid out a little better for finishing the basement. We just have to do a little more planning and generally have to be just a little more efficient with the old basements compared to the new.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what we see or what I've heard is that the majority of basements are done to add more space for children, family entertainment, or possibly guests. So, above basic construction pricing, we probably see wet bars as something you see a lot of. What type of pricing, what type of cost is associated with a wet bar for a basement?
Yeah, so I would say generally, if we're just talking about, again, in an older basement, we tend to see a little bit smaller wet bars just because we're more limited on space. So generally we'll see, 6 to 8 feet of lower cabinets, something like that, with a countertop, backsplash, and maybe some upper cabinets, maybe a wine rack or something like that. And you can probably get into that in the, $3,500 to $5,000 range, sort of on the very low end. And just like everything else, you can, really go as high as you want. But I would say generally, if you're in a starting point of around, if you're thinking about budgeting for this and you're thinking we just want a basic wet bar, I would say if you put $5,000 in your mind, that's probably at least a good starting point to get us in the ballpark.
Okay, what about those folks who want a full-blown, sit-down bar, mirrors and back, looks like they could, open up for business? What type of pricing do those guys look at?
Yeah, so I would say in general, you're going to be, you're almost creating another kitchen at that point. And so I would say then we generally start looking into what's the cost of kitchens in general. And so, again, you're probably high $20,000 range, because if you have a lot of granite, additional cabinets, additional electrical, at this point you'll probably want a dishwasher or some type of even if it's just a pull-out dishwasher to wash your glasses. So again, we start getting into probably the 25 to 35 is a decent starting point for
So
that.
what most people probably don't necessarily think about is that if you do that, you've got more plumbing, you've got probably more electric for the dishwasher, whatever else is happening there. So it's not just the bar and cabinets; it's additional electric and plumbing work, right?
Right, yeah, because I mean, if you just take electrical, for example, I mean, we'll end up probably adding 4 or 5 separate circuits just for that area because we'll have a refrigerator, we'll have the disposal, we'll have at least 1 or 2 dedicated circuits for just the appliances on top of the bar. And with every other basement, generally, unless it's on a crawl space, some of the newer basements are on crawl spaces. We have to cut some additional concrete too, generally. So
Okay.
that makes it a little bit just a lot more in depth. And again, I would think of it more as like a kitchen at that point.
And so when you cut concrete, folks need to understand that costs money.
It does. Yeah, I told a client this the other day. I think some people it really scares them away, where they just say, okay, well, we see a pipe over here, so we're gonna try to shoehorn the bathroom in this area. And I would say in general, it is expensive. It's probably a couple $1,000s to move plumbing around, but in the grand scheme of things, generally speaking, most people are most happy to spend a little bit more money to get the right layout. So I would say, yes, it's something to consider, but we should definitely think about it in terms of, hey, does this work with the layout too? Because it's again, if you spend a couple $1,000s on moving the plumbing on a $60,000 basement, you're talking as a percentage not that much. So it makes sense to me to work the space around and move the plumbing as needed. So just something to think about.
No, it makes perfect sense. Now, next to wet bars, I would imagine you get a lot of requests for kind of a home theater setup. Do you see many of those?
We do. Again, I would say for the most part, we always get, almost always, you get some kind of media area. We get less requests for full-blown theaters. Again, that would tend to be on the newer side. So the newer homes didn't have a little more room, potentially higher ceilings, so you can do some kind of a stadium setup. But we get lots of requests and do a lot of TV, surround sound, that type of stuff. And within that, we end up doing a lot of built-in, media built-in stuff, so you can keep all of your equipment down below, fit your TV, and then install, the proper lighting that people want, and then also surround sound if they want that as well.
So, what's the additional cost of setting up your home theater? Not with the tiered
Yeah.
stuff and tiers, but just what you just discussed. What are you looking at?
So I would say if you're just on the lower end and you just want essentially an area for the TV, you're going to wall mount the TV and you're going to maybe buy a cabinet for below, and you want a couple extra speakers. I mean, we're really very, very minimal. Especially a lot of times the client will provide their own speakers. Clients tend to want a certain type. We can supply them if needed, but so if we're just supplying essentially the wire to it, I mean, we're talking $500 to do some basic wiring. If we do some built-ins, generally a basic media built-in on a smaller size would be, 3,000 to 5,000. So that would be
Okay.
that additional that. So generally the media areas, if you're doing something basic, isn't too expensive.
So, speaking of built-ins, do you get a lot of requests for built-in cabinets and things of that nature?
We do, yeah. So we do. I would say the most of the built-ins we do are associated with the media areas, and then also we get some built-in requests for. Sometimes we get some kind of odd architectural details, especially in the older homes, and they want a bookcase or something of that nature. And and a basic sort of built-in bookcase, the material isn't that expensive, but it tends to be a lot of labor work. So almost anything is going to be 1,000 or up, depending on what we do. And it really is kind of a custom detail that would need, it's really hard for me to say even a set price, because it depends on the material. It depends on obviously how big it is. Is it there any kind of custom where you have to go around venting or stuff.
So you're going to have to look at individual quotes, but you can figure 1,000 up for some built-in.
If it's a base, yeah, I would say, I mean, start if it's a basic media area, start kind of 3,500 to 5,000. If you're doing just a basic bookcase, somewhere in the $1,000 to $1,500 range. If you're just thinking about initially, what do we want to budget for doing our project, that'll at least get you close to where you'll be.
Now that actually in my basement, I just thought of this, but we have a built-in big bookcase. Around the corner is a fireplace, and I know you and I haven't discussed this, but do you get many requests for fireplaces in a basement? And if so, what's that going to run somebody?
Yeah, so we actually don't get a ton of requests for fireplaces in basements. When we do, it's almost always a gas insert of some kind. And again, these vary widely on price. You can be pretty easily 10 grand, or probably on the low end, you'd be somewhere in the $5,000 to $7,000 range for the unit and the installation. And then depending on what you do for a mantle or tile around. So again, we see less of it just because a lot of times people are trying to conserve the space, and it is kind of a pricier option. But depending on if you have the space and it works for your design, I mean, that it could certainly add some aesthetic detail that would be nice. So again, I think if you're doing a basic one, you could probably start kind of thinking about it in that $7,000 range.
We use our basement for probably the same thing everybody else does, but especially when guests come. And so that fireplace is right next to a bedroom, see-through thing. For us, it would definitely be worth it because we have people down there all the time. And basements are a little colder than the rest of the house, so it's kind of a nice touch. What other features? Do you see any beams, wood beams, that type of stuff? Are people requesting that these days?
Yeah, so we see more faux beams or accent beams on main floors. So we certainly do a lot of that on additions or interior remodels that we do. Again, most of the time, the only reason we don't see as many accent beams is just because of the height of the ceiling. Now, sometimes there's structural details, beams that drop down, they just can't be moved. So at that point, then we try to incorporate some kind of nicer detail at that point. Again, on some of the newer stuff, we see 9-foot ceilings. Then you can certainly have the room and the ability to do some accent beams if you want. So I'd say we don't see it a ton, but certainly around the structural parts, if there's a drop beam, we do that quite often.
What about exercise rooms? Are people asking for that these days?
Yeah, every once in a while. I would say probably less than 10% of the stuff that we do, people even mention it. I don't know if that's people.
Maybe that's the people you're selling to, David.
Yeah, maybe they're just going to the gym or something. But
right, they don't need it.
Yeah. So generally, exercise rooms, if it's a basic room, it's basically a bedroom that you've converted into an exercise room. Now, if you want to go and do mirrors, if you need some specialized flooring, if you want some speakers or other media in there, it just sort of depends what you've chosen. The flooring can be quite expensive. Kind of a traditional gym floor can be pretty expensive. But in general, if you want just a basic exercise room, I wouldn't factor in too much more, maybe 10 to 15% more than just a normal bedroom. Maybe for an extra, every once in a while we'll have some requests for some additional blocking for equipment that's mounted to walls, and we can certainly accommodate that. But the exercise rooms in general on our side tend to be not much additional, because the client then generally will kind of add their, if they want mirrors, they'll add those.
So like so many things, a lot of that depends on what they want.
It really does. Yeah, it's hard to, there's so much variability in all this. It's hard to say it's going to be X or Y. There's so much variation.
You know, one thing I've seen, having talked to literally probably thousands of homeowners about basements, is that the one thing contractors or homeowners don't think about very often is extra lighting. A lot of contractors will bid it at the, you know, basically the permit level lighting. And for me, it's always been really worth a little extra money to light up that basement. What type of ideas do you have on that, or what do you suggest to homeowners?
So the electrician that we use for most of our projects is really good at laying out and helping me and the client understand what the lighting needs are going to be. So when I give a proposal, we almost always it's almost always recessed can lighting in basements, with maybe a few accent, like a light over a vanity in the bathroom, or some specialized lighting in the media area, or something like that in the wet bar area. So I generally try to, when I bid the project, I just bid what the kind of top end will be. And if the homeowner wants to dial it back a little bit, we can certainly do that. But we don't try to overkill it too much, but we definitely want to be on that high side, because like you said before, basements do just naturally are darker, and it makes a huge difference on the just how the basement feels if the lighting is correct. So we try to spend a lot of time on, after the framing is done, especially, we'll walk through with the clients and just say, hey, this is what we're thinking on the lighting. Does that work? What do you think that feels like to you? And we can pretty easily add, especially the can lighting isn't that expensive. So we're pretty flexible on adding or subtracting those as we go.
And dimmers on those and those kind of things are really pretty important. That's what a lot of folks don't see in differences between bids and contractors. Sometimes they don't take that into account. And I used to call it usable hours in a basement. If you do the lighting right, the heat right, and the design right, you'll use it a lot more. We haven't talked about wine cellars. Do you see much demand for that?
Yeah, so we were talking about this off the air a little bit too, but there's just again one of these things that is just so variable in price, and so we tend not to see too much of the wine cellars, just mainly as a function of space, and then also they can become quite pricey. So kind of on the lower end, if somebody is just wanting something pretty basic, we can put an actual just wine refrigerator, and we do this quite often just in the wet bar area, or kind of under the stair area, or wherever they want it, whatever works for them. And then you can do, if you want to go a little bit bigger than that, probably in like the $5,000 to $7,000 range, you could do a basic kind of below the stair wine cellar cooler. And then then you can get into basically, say, a 10 by 10 or 15 by 15 pretty large wine cellar. And if you do, depending on what kind of wood you do on the inside, and with the bottle racks and the doors, and that stuff can get pretty expensive. I mean, you can really run it up there as high as you want, but you're probably $25,000, $30,000 as sort of a basic starting point for something like that, just because the refrigeration and the humidity control is pretty important in that. And then you have to have everything sealed in, and then at that point you spent that amount of money to get it to that point. Most people want it to be aesthetically pleasing too, where they can take clients or friends down there. And so that's really, at that point, it can get fairly pricey.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You don't see a lot of exercise rooms and wine cellars, so I wonder if those things go together. People have the wine cellar, need the exercise rooms.
Yeah,
Not sure.
maybe.
Let me ask you a question though. Based on this discussion, let's assume, and if I'm wrong, tell me or adjust it. But let's say basic construction on a 1,000 square foot basement, very ballpark, is 45,000. You can then kind of start piecing everything you just talked about into it. Okay, I've got a wet bar that's going to be 5,000. I want some bookcases. Can you kind of is 45,000 ish about right for basic construction in 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, I would say you're probably pretty close if you're just if that consists of maybe two bedrooms, kind of an open area, and a basic bathroom. That's probably pretty close. I would say generally we're seeing stuff just a little bit higher than that, maybe more like 50 to 55.
Yeah.
And then yeah, then at that point, if you're adding sort of anything on top of that, wet bars, wine cellars, exercise rooms. Again, the exercise room, depending on what you want, probably doesn't increase it too much more. But certainly the main things that we see that increase the pricing are some upgrades in bathrooms, wet bars, and just built-in stuff. I mean, I would say that's the kind of upgrades that we see on a regular basis are built-ins, wet bars, and then bathroom upgrades.
That makes sense because it's pretty rare you go into a new finished basement and see your ugly little bathroom, the $4,000 Sears bathroom,
Right.
as I call it. So yeah, that's a good question. What do you, or that's a good statement. What do you think it costs to take that basic bathroom and make it a nice bathroom? Is that an extra 4,000 or
Yeah,
above the normal cost of a bathroom?
probably. I would say that most of the time the biggest cost increases that we see, which I think is the kind of the best aesthetic for the bathroom. I think it really sets the bathroom off is frameless shower glass. So if the difference between, in my mind, the difference between a shower curtain and the glass, I mean, the shower curtain, you don't see all the nice tile work you've done. So if you walk into a bathroom that has all this, frameless shower glass, even if it's just on the front with a door, I mean, that's going to be, somewhere in the $2,000 range just for that piece. So right there, I mean, you've done a couple $1,000s, but it really makes it, I think it takes a 7 bathroom to a 9 or a 10 pretty quickly because it feels like a spa kind of hotel bathroom, and it really makes a huge difference. So that's where we see some big jumps in cost is just some people want heated floors. So if we do heated floors, for example, heated floors and just some shower glass, you're probably looking at an additional 3,500 to 4,000. So I would say that's pretty, a pretty standard upgrade too. So, if you want the basic bathroom, it's X. If you want a little bit upgraded with glass and maybe some better tile or whatever, you're probably, like you said, 4,000 to 5,000.
And that's 4,000 to 5,000 above the basic cost.
Yeah, that's right.
So it really comes down to how much you like your mother and father-in-law.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So,
well, we actually see too quite a bit of in the city, especially. The old houses are not really set up for any kind of master bedroom on the main floor. Especially we're looking at 20s, 30s bungalows, or even 1900s, early 1900s. So we actually see quite a few master suite setups in basements. And then on the newer side, yeah, then it's definitely more of the kids are down there, or it's your parents or whatever, I guess.
Your drunk buddy from college.
That's right.
That guy. Yeah, that does make sense. I didn't even think of that. In those older homes, leave the older kids upstairs and you get your master suite in the basement. Because there's only 3 ways to go. You can do your basement, you can pop a top, you can go with an addition. The basement certainly is the least expensive of those options.
Yeah.
Most of the time. That's why you're doing so many of those. So again, you do basement finishing in Denver, obviously, but as well as Arvada, Colorado, and Golden, Westminster, Lakewood. You go as far south as Littleton.
Yeah, yeah, we will. And Littleton's a huge area. So we've done projects as far south as actually Chatfield. So yeah, we're basically all over the metro.
Okay, good. And you folks are probably watching this either on David's website, which is ldconstructiondenver.com, and or you might be seeing it on the 24/7 Home Show. Either way, you can see David's work and more about his company at ldconstructiondenver.com. And David, what's the phone number? How would they get hold of you directly if they have some questions for you?
So they can either call the office, which is 303-895-9979, and that will there's several options there. So if you can't, you can either reach me that way. If I'm not available, there's a couple other people within the company that you can try to get a hold of, or you can just call me directly 970-231-7438. That's my cell phone.
So all you sales guys out there, you just got David's cell phone. Make sure you jump on it and sell them something today. Hey, David, we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about basement design. It was very educational. You can see that David's obviously a quality contractor with a lot of knowledge. Give him a call when you're thinking of finishing your basement. And we'll have you back again as soon as we can on other subjects about basements. But thanks, Dave, and I'd say have a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday, but you never know when folks are going to see this. So it might be Valentine's, it might be 4th of July, whatever the next holiday is, I want you to have a good one, okay?
All right. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.